10:56 p.m., after 6 grueling hours of back-to-back meetings, the executive boardroom of Carter Industries was finally silent. Olivia Carter sat in her high-back chair, eyes closed as if she had collapsed from pure exhaustion. But when the heavy oak door creaked open, she wasn't actually asleep. She was watching. A maintenance worker stepped inside with an old, rusted toolbox. Daniel Hayes, a single father working the night shift. He saw the powerful CEO slumped over, alone. No witnesses, no cameras pointed his way. Daniel could have done anything. But what he did next made Olivia freeze in shock. Daniel Hayes was 35 years old, but the deep lines around his eyes suggested he had lived twice that long. He was the lead night shift maintenance technician for Carter Industries, a massive tech finance conglomerate. To the thousands of employees who worked in the building during the day, Daniel was practically invisible. He was just a pair of navy blue coveralls moving through the shadows after the sun went down. But to his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, Daniel was the most important man in the entire world. They lived together in a small, cramped apartment near the city center, filled with books and toys. Every morning, Daniel would return from his grueling shift just in time to make Emma her favorite breakfast. He would walk her to school, holding her hand tightly, before heading home to sleep for a few hours. Every night before he headed back to the skyscraper, he would kiss her forehead as she fell asleep. Emma was a bright child with a vivid imagination and a heart that was as large as her father's. She was fiercely proud of her father's job, even if others looked down on manual labor. She often told her friends at school with a beaming smile, "My dad fixes everything." She didn't care that he spent his nights fixing broken toilets or flickering light fixtures in office halls. In her eyes, he was the hero who kept the entire world running while everyone else was dreaming. On the morning of this particular day, Emma had handed Daniel a very special drawing before school. It was a colorful picture of the two of them standing hand in hand in front of the Carter Industries building. Above the towering skyscraper, she had drawn a massive, bright rainbow with every color imaginable. Daniel had smiled, his heart swelling with a kind of pride that money could never buy. He carefully folded the drawing and placed it inside his worn, brown leather wallet for safekeeping. He carried it like a shield, a constant reminder of the person he was working so hard to protect. It was a reminder to always live his life with integrity, so he would never disappoint his little girl. Before his life in the city, Daniel had been a highly skilled electronics systems technician in the military. He was trained to handle complex electrical grids and sensitive equipment under extreme combat pressure. He was used to fixing critical communication systems while sirens blared and the earth shook around him. But after his wife passed away 3 years ago due to a sudden illness, he chose to leave the service. He needed to be a constant presence for Emma, who had already lost so much at such a young age. He traded the high-stakes world of military technology for a quiet, stable job as a building technician. It was a sacrifice he made gladly, preferring the quiet nights of the city to the chaos of the front lines. Carter Industries was a different kind of battlefield, one made of glass, steel, and high-frequency trading. It was a multi-billion-dollar empire built on revolutionary financial technology and global influence. At the helm of this empire was Olivia Carter, a woman known for her brilliance and her absolute ruthlessness. At 30, she was one of the youngest and most decisive CEOs in the history of the financial district. She was famous for her iron fist management style and her inability to tolerate failure from anyone. But lately, even the Iron CEO was feeling the immense pressure of a failing project that haunted her. Her company's flagship project, a multi-billion-dollar AI trading platform, was plagued by system failures. For weeks, mysterious glitches had been wiping out data and causing massive financial losses. Her best engineers were baffled, unable to find the root cause of the digital ghost in the machine. Her investors were panicking, and the board of directors was starting to whisper about a change in leadership. On this specific night, Olivia had just finished a 6-hour crisis meeting that resulted in 0 solutions. She was exhausted, frustrated, and feeling more isolated than she had ever felt in her professional life. After her team finally left the boardroom, she stayed behind, staring at the darkened city skyline. She felt the weight of the thousands of families whose livelihoods depended on her company's success. She heard the maintenance call go out on the radio, A flickering light in the boardroom needed repair. Olivia decided to stay right where she was, hidden in the shadows of her high-backed leather chair. She slumped back, letting her head fall to the side and allowing her breathing to become deep and slow. She wanted to see how the lowly night staff behaved when they thought the powerful CEO was asleep. It was a silent test of character, born from a moment of pure exhaustion and a desire for truth. Daniel Hayes was about to walk right into the middle of that test, carrying his toolbox and his integrity. He didn't know that tonight his skills as a medic and a technician would be tested in a whole new way. He only knew that there was a light that needed fixing, and he was the man for the job. If you believe that a father's love is the greatest motivation in the world, type Hero Dad. Daniel arrived at the 42nd floor just as the grandfather clock in the lobby struck 11 o'clock. The elevator doors slid open to a hallway of polished marble, expensive art, and absolute silence. A few senior managers were still lingering near the elevators, clutching their expensive leather portfolios. They were exhausted and irritable after the failed meeting, looking for someone to blame for their stress. When they saw Daniel in his grease-stained coveralls and carrying his heavy, scratched metal toolbox, they didn't even bother to hide their disdain or their sense of superiority over the blue-collar worker. "What are you doing on this floor?" one manager snapped, checking his diamond-encrusted watch. "This floor is restricted after hours. Maintenance is supposed to use the service elevator in the back." Daniel stopped and lowered his head slightly, a humble habit from his years of following military protocol. "I was called for the electrical flicker in the main boardroom, sir. I'm just here to do the repair." The manager groaned and rolled his eyes, looking at Daniel as if he were a nuisance or a stray dog. "Fine. Just be quick about it, and try not to get grease on the mahogany table. It's worth more than you." Daniel didn't argue. He didn't defend himself against the insult or show any sign of being bothered. He simply nodded and walked toward the heavy, ornate oak doors of the executive boardroom. He was used to being looked down upon by people who thought a suit made them a better human being. He pushed the door open quietly, the hinges making almost no sound thanks to his regular maintenance. The room was vast and cold, dominated by a long mahogany table that reflected the city lights outside. At the far end of the table, he saw the CEO, Olivia Carter, sitting perfectly still in her chair. She looked small and vulnerable in the massive chair, her head tilted as if she were in a deep slumber. Her eyes were closed and her breathing was deep and rhythmic, perfectly mimicking a person who had collapsed. Daniel stood still at the entrance for a long moment, making sure he wouldn't startle her or wake her up. He moved with the silence of a ghost, a skill he had perfected while navigating dark barracks in the army. He set his toolbox down on the thick, plush-carpeted floor with extreme painstaking care. He didn't want the clink of a single wrench to disturb the rest of a woman who looked so exhausted. He looked up at the light fixture above the conference table, watching the subtle, erratic flicker. Most technicians would have just swapped the bulb and left, but Daniel's military mind was different. He opened the electrical panel on the side wall, his eyes scanning the complex wiring with precision. He noticed something that the high-paid daytime engineers had completely missed during their inspections. The power levels in the room weren't just fluctuating, they were surging in a very specific, high-frequency pattern. Daniel pulled out a small, handheld multimeter from his bag, his brow furrowing in deep concentration. He measured the voltage at the source, then at the output of the secondary surge protector. His eyes widened as he realized the truth that had escaped the company's tech experts for weeks. This boardroom sat directly above the building's primary server farm, the heart of the entire company. The backup power configuration for this floor was bleeding electromagnetic interference into the data lines. Every time the lights flickered in this room, a surge of noise hit the sensitive servers in the basement. It was a subtle, invisible flaw in the building's design, a ghost created by a simple wiring error. Daniel realized that this was likely the cause of the system errors that were costing the company millions. It wasn't a software bug or a hack. It was a physical hardware glitch hidden in the walls of the building. He looked back at the sleeping CEO, realizing the sheer weight of the stress she must be carrying. He could have just replaced the light bulb in 5 minutes and headed back to the break room for a nap. He could have ignored the bigger problem and finished his shift early, but his integrity wouldn't allow it. However, before he touched the wires, he noticed the air conditioner vent above Olivia's head. It was blowing a steady stream of freezing, refrigerated air directly onto her exposed shoulders. She shivered slightly in her sleep, her skin pale under the harsh, flickering lights of the boardroom. Without a second thought, Daniel stepped toward the climate control panel near the entrance. He moved quietly, adjusting the digital louvers so the air would flow safely away from her body. He then took off his own light work jacket, which he kept clean despite the nature of his daily work. He gently draped it over the CEO's legs to keep her warm, acting with the gentleness of a father. He didn't do it for a reward or a promotion. He didn't do it because he knew she was actually awake. He did it because he was a man who lived by a code that said you take care of those in need. He then returned to the electrical panel, pulling out his soldering iron and a roll of high-grade copper wire. He began to rewire the surge protector, working with the focused precision of a master combat technician. He worked for nearly an hour in the dim light, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool room. He was fixing a billion-dollar problem that no one had asked him to fix, simply because he could. If you believe that true character is what you do when you think nobody is watching, type integrity. As Daniel leaned over the panel to secure the final delicate wire, his wallet slipped out of his back pocket. It hit the soft carpet with a muffled thud, flipping open as it landed near the CEO's expensive heels. Emma's drawing, the one with the bright rainbow and the giant skyscraper, slipped out of the leather. It fluttered through the air like a falling leaf and landed face up right at Olivia Carter's feet. Olivia chose that exact moment to wake up, her eyes snapping open with a clarity that was terrifying. She looked down at the floor and saw the colorful drawing, then looked up at the man standing over the panel. She reached down with a slow, deliberate movement and picked up the piece of crumpled paper. She read the words written in a child's messy, colorful handwriting. "My dad fixes everything." Olivia looked at Daniel, who was frozen in place, his soldering iron still warm in his steady hand. He looked embarrassed and slightly panicked, as if he had been caught doing something illegal or wrong. "Is this yours?" Olivia asked, her voice sounding like velvet but carrying the weight of a judge. She held up the drawing, her eyes searching Daniel's face for any sign of deception or greed. Daniel stood up straight, wiping his greasy hands on a rag and looking down at the floor in shame. "Yes, ma'am, I'm so sorry. It must have fallen out while I was working on the panel. I'll leave now." Olivia stood up, the light jacket he had placed on her legs sliding down to the mahogany floor. She didn't look angry. She looked deeply, profoundly moved by the small act of kindness he had shown. "You adjusted the vents for me. You covered me with your own jacket while I was asleep," she said. "Why did you do that? You don't even know me. To most people, I'm just a name on a building." "I saw you were cold, ma'am," Daniel said simply, his voice low and sincere. "I didn't mean to overstep. I have a daughter at now. I know how important it is to get some rest when you're that tired." Olivia walked toward the electrical panel, her eyes scanning the complex work he had just completed. "The engineers told me the lights just needed a new transformer." "What have you done to the grid?" Daniel took a deep breath and decided to tell her the truth, no matter how crazy it might sound. He explained the electromagnetic interference pattern in the feedback loop he had discovered. "The software isn't failing because of a virus or a bad code," Daniel said, pointing to his meter. "The hardware is physically vibrating. You're losing data packets every time the air conditioner cycles." Olivia stared at the panel, her sharp mind quickly processing the technical information he was giving. She wasn't a technician, but she understood the cold, hard logic of a mechanical failure. She immediately picked up the internal phone on the conference table and dialed a high-level extension. "Get Marcus, the Chief Technology Officer, up here, right now," she commanded with ice in her voice. "And tell him to bring the server logs for the last hour. I don't care if he's in bed. Get him here." 5 minutes later, Marcus, a man in a $3,000 suit, burst into the executive boardroom. He looked at Daniel with a mixture of confusion, annoyance, and a heavy dose of professional arrogance. "Who is this man, and why is he touching the primary power grid of the 42nd floor?" Marcus asked. "He's the man who just found the ghost you've been chasing for a month," Olivia said, her eyes flashing. She handed the rainbow drawing back to Daniel and turned to her CT. "Oh, Check the logs, right now. Marcus scoffed, looking at Daniel's coveralls. Olivia, he's a maintenance guy. He doesn't have a degree. I have a team of researchers from MIT working on this problem. They say it's a software synchronization error. The MIT team has been failing me for 6 long weeks, Olivia snapped, her voice cutting like a knife. Check the logs, Marcus. Look at the timestamp of the last data surge and compare it to his work. Marcus begrudgingly opened his laptop, his fingers typing furiously as he accessed the secure servers. His face went from a smug red to a ghostly, sickly white as he scrolled through the real-time data. Every single time Daniel had adjusted the wires in the panel, the server errors downstairs had stopped. The data was suddenly clean. For the first time in a month, the system was running at perfect efficiency. He's right, Marcus whispered, his voice trembling with shock. It was the surge protection relay. It was backfeeding white noise into the fiber lines. How? How did a janitor find this? Daniel stood there holding his daughter's drawing, his face calm and his posture perfectly straight. It's basic electronic warfare shielding, Daniel said. I used to do this for the army in the desert. It's a common flaw in high-rise buildings that use shared grounding for servers and lighting. The room seemed to freeze as the truth settled over everyone, like a heavy, cold blanket of snow. The senior managers who had gathered at the door were completely speechless, unable to look Daniel in the eye. The janitor they had mocked had just saved the multi-billion-dollar empire from a total collapse. Olivia looked at her managers, then at her CTO, and finally at the man in the blue-stained coveralls. She realized that she had been surrounded by people with degrees who were blinded by their own egos. A maintenance technician just solved a problem our engineers couldn't fix for weeks, Olivia said. She made sure her voice echoed out into the hallway so that every single person could hear her words. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable, the sound of a dozen executives feeling small. They had ignored the most talented person in the building simply because of the clothes he wore. If you've ever been underestimated because of your job title or the way you look, type respect. Olivia walked out into the hallway, signaling for Daniel to follow her with his heavy metal toolbox. The senior managers who had mocked him earlier were now standing in a straight, uncomfortable line. They didn't look at Daniel with disdain or arrogance anymore. They looked at him with fear and shame. They knew they had made a massive mistake that could cost them their high-paying corporate careers. I believe you had something important to say to Mr. Hayes, Olivia said, looking at the manager. She stared at the man who had told Daniel he wasn't allowed on the executive floor earlier that night. The man stepped forward, his face turning a deep, painful shade of red as he avoided Daniel's gaze. I apologize, Daniel. I was out of line. I didn't realize your level of expertise. Daniel didn't gloat. He didn't demand a public apology or act superior to the man who had insulted him. He simply nodded his head. It's a big building, sir. Everyone is under a lot of stress tonight. I understand we all just want the job done right, Daniel added, showing more grace than they deserved. Olivia turned to Daniel, her expression softening in a way that her employees had never seen before. I don't think you do understand, Daniel, Olivia said, her voice filled with a genuine, deep respect. You just saved this company more than $1 billion in lost contracts and potential damages. She looked at his hands, which were still stained with graphite and electrical grease from the panel. Why are you working the night shift as a maintenance man? Why aren't you running a tech firm? Daniel leaned against his toolbox, thinking about his small apartment and his sleeping daughter. My daughter, Emma, I'm a single dad. I need to be home to take her to school in the morning. The military gave me the skills, but the civilian world doesn't always have a place for a guy like me. I just wanted a stable job so I could be there for my kid. The title never mattered to me. Olivia's heart was touched by his humility. She realized that Daniel Hayes was a rare kind of man. He was the most valuable asset in the entire skyscraper, and he had been treated like he was invisible. We are currently looking for a technical director for the entire infrastructure of this company. Olivia said the words loudly, making sure they carried through the entire executive wing of the building. It's a day shift position with a salary 4 times what you're making now as a technician. But I think we can make the hours flexible for a dedicated single father who needs to be home. Daniel was completely stunned, his mouth opening slightly as he tried to process the life-changing offer. "Ma'am, I don't have a corporate resume. I don't have the fancy certifications you usually require." "Your resume is written in the server logs in the basement," Olivia replied with a warm, genuine smile. "And your references were provided by your daughter in this very boardroom tonight." She pointed to the rainbow drawing in his hand, the one that said his dad could fix anything. She said her dad fixes everything. "Tonight you proved her right. I'd like you to start on Monday." The hallway, which had been a place of deep humiliation for Daniel hours ago, was now filled with hope. The managers began to offer their hands to him, their grips firm as they finally showed him respect. Daniel shook them, his hand steady. He wasn't just a maintenance guy in their eyes anymore. He was the man who had saved the empire when the smartest people in the room had given up. He thought about the apartment they lived in and the bills that had been piling up on the kitchen table. He thought about Emma's future and the look on her face when he told her the news on Monday morning. For the first time in 3 years, the weight on Daniel's shoulders felt a little bit lighter than before. He picked up his toolbox, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like a trophy he had earned. If you believe that good things eventually happen to good people who work hard, type justice. A few weeks passed by, and the transition for Daniel Hayes was like stepping into a completely new life. He no longer wore the navy blue coveralls that smelled of grease and old copper wiring. He wore a professional technician's uniform, and he had his own private office on the 40th floor. He was now the head of technical infrastructure, overseeing a team of 20 skilled engineers. But the biggest change wasn't the large salary or the prestigious title on the glass door of his office. It was the time he had. He could now pick Emma up from school every single afternoon at 3 o'clock. He didn't have to sleep through the day and miss her soccer games or her school plays anymore. He was a father again, not just a provider working in the dark while the rest of the world slept. One Friday afternoon, Daniel decided to bring Emma to the Carter Industries building for a visit. She was wide-eyed and silent as they walked through the grand marble lobby together, hand in hand. She saw the giant digital displays and the fountain, and she saw people in expensive suits. These were the same people who now stopped to say, "Good afternoon, Mr. Hayes," to her father. Emma gripped Daniel's hand tightly, looking up at him with a mixture of confusion and massive pride. They rode the glass elevator up to the 42nd floor, watching the city expand beneath their feet. They walked toward the heavy oak doors of the boardroom, where Daniel's life had changed forever. Emma looked up at the high, ornate ceiling and the lights that were now burning steady and bright. "Is this the place where you fix the big lights for the lady, Daddy?" she asked in a tiny whisper. Daniel knelt down on the plush carpet so he was at eye level with his daughter, smiling softly. "Yes, sweetie, this is the place, and I only did it because of that drawing you gave me that morning. It reminded me to always do my best, even when I was tired and thought no one was watching." Just then the boardroom door opened, and Olivia Carter walked out, looking as sharp and decisive as ever. She stopped in her tracks when she saw the little girl with the messy pigtails and the bright, gap-toothed smile. "You must be Emma," Olivia said, crouching down on the floor to meet the girl at her own level. "I'm Olivia. Your dad is a very important person in this building. He's a hero to all of us here." Emma smiled proudly, her eyes sparkling. "I told everyone. My dad fixes everything in the world." "Did he fix your building too? Did he make the lights stop shaking for you, Miss Olivia?" Olivia looked at Daniel, then back at the little girl, her heart feeling fuller than it had in years. "He fixed a lot more than just the building, Emma. He reminded us all what truly matters in life." Olivia reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, gold-colored pin, the company's highest honor. She carefully pinned it to Emma's denim jacket, right over her heart, and gave her a small wink. "This is for being the best assistant supervisor in the entire city," Olivia said with a warm laugh. "Without your drawing, we might have never found the man we were looking for to lead this team." As they walked back toward the elevator, Emma looked up at the giant Carter Industries logo on the wall. She looked at her father, her hero, and beamed with a happiness that lit up the entire hallway. Daniel reached into his pocket and felt the familiar, soft edges of his worn leather wallet. Inside, the drawing of the rainbow and the skyscraper was still there, folded neatly and safely. He realized that his daughter's absolute faith in him was the most powerful thing he would ever possess. It was the force that had kept him honest and hardworking when the nights were long and cold. It was what had made him kind when he was exhausted and overlooked by the rest of the world. It was what had made him a hero in a room full of billionaires who had forgotten how to see people. Daniel looked at Emma and kissed her forehead as the elevator doors began to slide shut. You were right, Emma. Some things are worth protecting, and some things are worth fixing forever. They stepped into the elevator, leaving the executive boardroom and the past behind them for good. Daniel Hayes was no longer a shadow in the night. He was a beacon of light for his daughter. And as the elevator descended toward the street, Daniel knew that he had finally kept his promise. He had lived up to the words on that piece of paper. He had fixed everything that was broken. If you believe that dignity and respect matter more than status or power, subscribe to Hidden Heart Stories for more powerful stories about everyday heroes.